Welcome to Lesson 6.3. Today we're going to talk circumference and area of sectors. Our learning objectives for today: being able to demonstrate an understanding of calculating the circumference of a circle, being able to find the area of a sector given information such as the circumference and area of a sector, being able to calculate the area of a sector given the radius and the central angle measure, being able to understand what is meant by a sector of a circle, being able to find the area of sectors given radius and central angle measure, and being able to find the arc length of a sector given radius and central angle measure. Here's our introductory problem for the day. Make sure to read through this before moving on. A sector of a circle is an area bounded by two radii or two radiuses and the arc between the endpoints of the radii. The sector is like a slice of the circle, so its area will be a portion of the whole thing. To figure out how big the slice is, first figure out the size of the whole circle. You learned how to do this already. Remember, it's the area of a circle formula: A is equal to pi r squared. Now we want to take only part of this circle, so we figure out how the angle measure of the slice compares to the entire circle. Try to look at this value as a fraction of the whole thing. We can now calculate the sector's area by multiplying these two values in the formula. A is equal to the measure of the central angle divided by 360 times pi r squared. So make sure you have that formula written down somewhere. If r is the radius and AB is the arc bounding a sector. So now we're going to find the area of the blue sector. So how we're going to do that, we look at what we're given. This measure in here, that's what we call a central angle. And this is going to go in the top of our fraction. So we're going to put that 60 in for the measure of AB over 360. Just like always, we're going to put 3.14 in for pi, and we're going to multiply that by 8 squared. Now remember, when we square something, we take it times itself. So really, I'm going to have 60 over 360 times 3.14 times 64. And if I type that into my calculator just the way I see it, 60 divided by 360 times 3.14 times 64, I get an answer of 33.49, then a bunch of threes, but we're going to keep it to rounding to 2 decimal places, so our area is 33.49. Here we got another example. Again, we're going to use the same formula that we did before. We've got the measure of AB over 360 times pi times r squared. But if you look here, all we have in the middle here is a box. When you see a box like this, that means it's a 90-degree angle. So we're going to use 90 in for our measure. So we're going to put 90 on top. And we're going to use 3.14 for pi, just like we always do. And now we're going to have 8 again in for our radius. Remember, when we square something, we multiply it by itself. So 8 times 8 is going to be 64. And so I'm going to type this in again just the way I see it: 90 divided by 360 times 3.14 times 64, giving me an area of 50.24. That is the area of the blue sector. We don't always need to be given a picture either. We can be given this information right here. Find the area of a sector with a central angle of 45 degrees and a radius of 4 inches. So again, we have our formula, which we need to know: measure of AB over 360 times pi r squared. Our central angle of 45, that's going to go in on the top of our fraction. 4 inches is going to go in for r, so it's going to be 45 over 360 times 3.14 times 4 squared. Remember, when we square something, we multiply it by itself, so we're going to have 4 times 4, which is going to give me 16. So if we type all that in, 45 divided by 360 times 3.14 times 16, I'm going to get my answer of 6.28. And now I'm given a label of inches, so now I can use square inches, because remember, we're finding area, and area is always squared. Our next example, we're still finding the area of a sector. We've got the central angle of 60 degrees. and a radius of 3 feet. So again, our central angle goes in at the top of our fraction, the radius goes in for r, and we use 3.14 for pi. So my equation is going to be 60 over 360 times 3.14 times 3 squared. 3 squared, again, we're going to be doing 3 times 3. So we're going to type in 60 divided by 360 times 3.14 times 9. And if I do that, I get an answer of 4.71. And again, we're given a label, so we do need to use that. Feet squared, or square feet. So 4.71 square feet is the area of that sector. Go ahead and pause the video and find the area of the sector with a central angle of 180 degrees and a radius of 8 yards. And then hit play and see how you did. So our equation should have looked like 180 divided by 360 times 3.14 times 8 squared. Again, 8 squared is 64. If we type that into our calculator, the area should be 100.48 square yards. So now that we know how to calculate the area of a sector, let's apply a similar strategy to find the arc length of that same sector. This time we need to recall the other formula that we learned in relation to circles. Remember, the formula for circumference is circumference equals 2 pi r, or pi times diameter. We'll use the formula given radius since the sector will be created with radii. Since we only want a slice of the whole circle, we only want a small section of the total circumference. Again, we need to figure out the fractional part of the whole circle, but dividing the central angle measured by 360. Multiply this fraction by the circumference, and there you have it, your arc length of the sector. The formula looks like this. The measure of the central angle divided by 360 times 2 pi r. So again, have that formula written down somewhere, you're going to need it. So r is going to be our radius, and AB is the arc bounding a sector, so that's our central angle. So here we've got our blue sector, and we want to find the arc length. And again, arc length is just the length around the outside. So they just want to know how long is this measure here from radius to radius. So again, we've got this box. Remember, the box means 90 degrees. That's going to go into the top of our fraction. The radius of 8 goes in for r. We're still going to use 3.14 for pi, so our equation is going to look like 90 divided by 360 times 2 times 3.14 times 8. And again, we can type that in just the way we see it. 90 divided by 360 times 2 times 3.14 times 8. If we hit enter, we get our arc length of 12.56. And that's going to be the length of our arc in that blue sector. Just like with area of a sector, we don't need the picture to be able to solve a problem like this. So if we're given that we're finding the arc length of a sector, and we're given the central angle is 45 degrees and the radius is 6 inches, we have enough information to solve. The central angle, 45, is going to go in at the top of our fraction. The radius of 6 is going to go in for r. We're still going to use 3.14 for pi. So my equation is 45 divided by 360 times 2 times 3.14 times my radius of 6. And if I type that in just the way I see it, 45 divided by 360 times 2 times 3.14 times 6, I get that my arc length is 4.71. We do have a label. We're given inches, so we're going to use inches. Now we're using length, so we do not square our label for arc length. Only area gets squared. Now we're given a central angle of 30 degrees and a radius of 10 feet, and we're asked to find the arc length. Central angle goes on the top of our fraction. Radius goes in for r. So our equation is going to be 30 divided by 360 times 2 times 3.14 times 10. If I type that into my calculator, 30 divided by 360 times 2 times 3.14 times 10, I get my arc length of 5.23, and there's going to be a bunch of 3's after it, but that doesn't round to the 3 up to a 4, so I leave it as 5.23. My label is feet, so I bring that down, and my arc length is 5.23 feet. Now we're given a central angle of 160 degrees and a radius of 2 yards. Again, our central angle goes in on the top of our fraction. Our radius goes in for r. So my formula is going to be 160 over 360 times 2 times 3.14 times 2. If I type that into my calculator just the way I see it, 160 divided by 360 times 2 times 3.14 times 2, I get my answer of 5.58 and then a bunch of 2's. Okay, that doesn't round it up, so I leave it as 5.58. My label is yards, so my arc length will be in yards as well. My arc length is 5.58 yards. Go ahead and pause the video and find the arc length of a sector that has a central angle of 300 degrees and a radius of 8 miles, and then hit play and see how you did. So for this one, you should have put 300 on the top of the fraction and 8 in for the radius, so you should have had 300 divided by 360 times 2 times 3.14 times 8, giving us an arc length of 41.87, because it's going to be a bunch of 6's there, so that rounds it up to the 7 miles as our answer. Okay, so for review, the formula for calculating the sector area is the measure of AB over 360 times pi r squared. The formula for arc length is the measure of AB over 360 times 2 pi r. Make sure you have those two written down somewhere. You're going to need them for the check-in and the quiz and the test. It's a lot easier when you have it down somewhere instead of trying to remember what it is. A sector of a circle is the area bounded by 2 radii and the arc between the endpoints of the radii. The sector is like a slice of a circle, so its area will be a portion of the whole thing, and the arc is a portion of the circumference of the circle.